Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another English video lecture. Now, today we'll be focusing on an elementary school classroom in a slum by Stephen Spender. Now, this poem is kind of related to the Lost Spring, but just from, like I said, another different perspective of looking at the same problem from a different lens. Stephen Spender is writing about like a Western slum here. This is one of the most important things that you should know when you're reading this story, or this poem, sorry, rather that this is a slum in a western city or in a western area. This is not really a slum in India as per se, because this was written in a time where he was much more into the civil rights movement, the author Stephen Spender. You should read up about him. He's got a very interesting life. One of the most interesting thing about him is he's been a big figure in the queer community. And by the queer community, I mean the LGBTQ community. So he's been kind of involved in that, like historically. He was prosecuted for kind of being a homosexual in his time, and like the people he associated with were popular homosexual writers of that time, and he faced a lot of discrimination for that in his day and age. But later on, there's been controversies, there's been things about him, nobody really knows if he was actually queer or if he was bisexual or what his sexuality was. But at the end of the day, like what you do with your genitals is like really the last interesting thing about you. Like it's not something that we should be focusing on unless and until it's something historically relevant, like Alan Turing's situation, which was actually relevant. If you don't know who Alan Turing is, look him up. He faced a lot of discrimination. Like that man. I mean, he's single-handedly, you could make an argument like Alan Turing was single-handedly responsible for ending the Second World War. The way he got repaid by the British government is absolutely heinous. Heinous is a word, Heinous, which you can look up. It means something that you need to find out. I'm not going to tell you everything. So yeah, that's why I'm recording this intro for you, by the way, because this poem is not really very difficult. I mean, it has a few words which are difficult, which I've told you guys to look up constantly with the dictionary. I'm sorry if I'm pausing a lot. I have a little bit of issue with my throat at the moment, and I'm recording this at a very weird time. So this is what this poem is about. It's about the author talking about what happens like inside an elementary school classroom in a slum. How are the children there? Like how do they look? What do they feel? What do they sound like? What does their future look like? And what should we be actually doing for them? And all of these social issues are addressed in this poem, just like The Lost Spring. So a lot of criticism about pieces like this, pieces of literature that address like poverty or issues in the society, is like they draw criticism from people who have actually lived in those situations, and they don't agree with like what the author is trying to say or what they're trying to convey to the general readership, and which is understandable. Like when you imagine, like if you are a poor person who's living in a school, I mean who's living in a slum, sorry about that. So imagine if you're a poor person who's living in a slum, and I mean you're struggling day to day, like you don't even know where your next meal is coming from, and somehow you're managing to send your kids to school and everything else with all your sacrifices, and then suddenly someone comes out of nowhere and writes a poem about you saying, oh, let's write about an elementary school classroom in a slum and this and that. And so, because the issue was like, Stephen Spender, when he started writing this poem, he was like very much into communism. Communism at that time was considered like, taboo to talk about, and if you were a commie, you would get shot. Right now, like, it's not in a much better place either. Like, the only communist regimes in this world are China, Cuba, and other places, which are not really the perfect examples of democracy. But at the same time, I mean, it's not like they don't, communism doesn't work. It does work, but like with anything else, there are drawbacks to it. There are certain, advantages and disadvantages to it. But like this, for this poem, like what Stephen Spender was trying to do was trying to, convey his ideals, his views of, equality, and, commenting on the situation between, the poor people and the rich people, and how the future of the poor children is so much more different than those of the rich ones. And it's not a bad poem. I'm just saying, like, this is like usually pieces like this, whenever you're addressing something like The Lost Spring, Anish Jung drew criticism for it for being a voyeur, and Stephen Spender drew criticism for this poem in his time because he was being considered a voyeur as well. Now, I've explained to you, I've asked you guys to look up the meaning of the word voyeur before as well. If you haven't done it till now, you should look it up. Voyeur, voyeur is the word that I'm asking you guys to look up. So let's just get into the video and I'll try to, explain everything to you. It's not very complicated like this poem, but just the way it's written, it might confuse a little bit. So I'll just go through it and I'll go through the explanation. I'll provide you guys with the notes and everything else, the stanza-wise explanation. One more thing I would like to mention is, yeah, poetic devices and literary devices are good for you guys to know because they help you understand the poem much better. They're not here for me. They're not here for me to show off. Oh, I know this much or that much. No, and they might not even be in your exams. Like to be honest, like with the new pattern and everything else. So they might not even be in your exams, but at the same time, I don't want you to walk out of my classroom not knowing what a poetic device is, not knowing what a metaphor is, not knowing what a simile is. I'm sorry, I'm sweating like a pig because it's freaking hot here. And I don't know how long this is gonna last. Like the heat is killing me. So I'll just stop this video right now, wipe off my sweat, and then we'll move on to the explanation. So let's take a look at the first stanza of the poem. In the first stanza, Stephen Spender is describing the miserable condition of the children in the school, right? Their faces aren't like normal school children faces, like your faces when you walked into the classroom. They're not like yours. Instead of being exuberant and energetic, they're like rootless weeds, withered and worn out. They're unclean and untidy as they are malnourished, sick, and hungry. Now, malnourishment is a significant problem being faced by people from, like, the lower reaches of society, or I should say, people who are living below a certain level of income because they cannot afford a lot of nutritious food as it is very expensive, and that's why they have problems like deficiencies and other things. Some of the diseases that the author has shown in this poem are diseases that were very prevalent in lower income societies in the past. Things like rickets, things like beriberi. Sorry about that. So yeah, these are all diseases that you can actually look up and see what they did. And it is very horrific looking at people who have rickets or people who have diseases like beriberi or people who have malnourishment or are undernourished. I mean, it's very heartbreaking. So it's not something fun to look at, but you should at least know what it looks like. And by the way, I have underlined all of these words in the notes that I'll be providing with this video. So you look up the meaning of all these difficult words and write them down in your notebook. All right. So, just as weeds are not wanted in the garden, so are these children of the slum unwanted in society. Nobody basically wants them. They're not, allowed inside, proper public schools or, good schools. They're stuck in their own little slum. Like I said, like the cycle of poverty is perpetuating, it's self-perpetuating. If your father is poor, then chances are you might also be poor because he won't be able to provide you with the life you need to, break out of that cycle, which is what we studied in the last spring as well. Like it's a generational thing. Poverty is generational in so many cases. In a lot of cases, it is generational. So it's the same thing here in the first sentence. So they have pale faces, their hair is uncombed. A tall, slim girl has her head bowed down as though she is exhausted physically because of malnutrition and emotionally because of poverty. The other students of the class are also in the same situation. There is a boy who is as thin as paper, again because of malnutrition and lack of civic amenities. He has eyes like that of a rat searching for food and betterment. Another child in the class, who is a victim of a genetic disorder, has gnarled bones and stunted growth. And this is what I'm talking about. Gnarled bones and stunted growth is like, a disease that is it says here genetic disorder, but I'm not really sure how much of a genetic disorder it is or how much of it is due to, malnourishment and poor access to healthcare and hygiene at a young age. So let's stop. We're not here to discuss civics. We're here to discuss literature. So that's what we're talking about. So he has eyes like that of a rat, and he has inherited this debilitating disease from his father and recites his lesson from his desk in a mellow and weak voice. Just like poverty, diseases can also be generational. They can be passed down from one generation to another, which is what we're looking at here. In one corner of this poorly lit and ill-equipped class is a sweet, unnoticed young child lost in the world of his dreams. The dull and monotonous classroom does not interest him, and hence his mind deviates towards the squirrel in her tree room. He too dreams of fun and frolic in an open space. So this is what the explanation of the first stanza is. So the second stanza deals with, the dirty classroom. Its description being provided to the readers. The poet is describing the classroom to us. So the walls are displayed the names of people who have given donations to the school. The bust of Shakespeare basically means the head of Shakespeare, like a statue with just his head and chest, is displayed in the clear background of the sky. Walls have pictures of the beautiful Tyrolese Valley as well as a map of the world. So I'll share a picture of the Tyrolese Valley here so you can look at like, how cruel it is to have a picture of this, the Tyrolese Valley in front of somebody who's living in a slum, inside a slum classroom, as well as a map of the world. The children's eyes can only view a narrow road enclosed with a dull sky. It is quite a dreary and depressing place for children. Now you can imagine, like, it's not fun studying there. It's not a fun school. Like, your school building is so beautiful, it's huge. There's grounds, there's lighting, there's fans. You have like open spaces and corridors and all the other amenities. These poor people just have one room in the middle of some dark alley in some corner where the only window they have to the world is, a narrow road with a dull dim lit sky and all these pictures of places in the world which are beautiful, which they will never get to see probably, which is a form of irony as well. Okay, so this is like what the second stanza deals with. If you have any issues, if you don't understand any lines or anything else, you can make notes and you can bring it up with me during the online lectures. So in the third stanza, like the tone of the poem changes from, a sad lamentation about, the situation of these poor children into like something aggressive by the poet. So he calls Shakespeare wicked because he thinks that he's misleading the children by showing them a world of beautiful ships, sun, and love, which is like completely unreal for them. So this is one example that I would say, shows you like how different like an elementary school classroom in a slum, which is in the Western cities or in the Western civilization, is from here, because these kids are learning Shakespeare in like a slum. In our slum, I don't think anybody is reading Shakespeare in our slums, especially in elementary school, or they don't have any idea who Shakespeare is, especially now. So this is like an example of first world poverty. Like there's different kind of levels of poverty, first world poverty, third world poverty. First world poor basically means that you have like resources, you have some resources but not all of them, and like you might have a smartphone, you might have a laptop, but you might also have $3 in your bank accounts, and you might be living on government relief and supplies and this and that, food stamps. I'm saying a lot is because I am having trouble organizing my thoughts properly because it is so freaking hot here that I feel like I'm going to melt into my chair. Oh my goodness. Anyway, so ignore that. But anyways, their existence is very sad. Like the and the third stanza, it doesn't matter like what I'm gonna say about it, what my opinion is. Like their existence is sad. There's no denying that fact. Like you can argue like, oh, they might not be as poor as our poor people, but at the same time, they're all poor people. So there is no better poor or worse poor, which is just like a stupid way. Like the only opinion I'll have is that they at least they have a chance to know what Shakespeare is, whereas kids in slums in India don't even have that. So these emaciated children, like emaciated is a word which I've used in the notes as well, and I've underlined it. So you need to look up its meaning. Emaciated, Emaciated. They are so thin that it appears they're wearing only skins. Like the skin is hanging off. There is literally no flesh under their skin. It's just skin and bones. Spectacles. He's compared them to broken bottle bits on stone, as because their spectacles look like pieces of wire just taped together. Like on their faces. Their entire appearance reeks of their deprivation. The poet shows his outrage by suggesting that the maps on their wall should show huge slums instead of beautiful graphics and scenic locations. All right. So this is where the stanza. So, in the final stanza of the poem, the poet is talking about the truth that there can be no change for the better unless somebody, like from the authorities or the government, comes in and visits the school. The map in the classroom is the only way these students get a chance to look at the world outside, their slums. The windows of their classroom shut them and confine them to their world of poverty and helplessness. Then the poet appeals to the people who are in power to liberate these slum children from their horrendous life. He also exhorts the people themselves to break open these windows, which appears to have sealed the fate of these children. All right, like what does it mean, sealing the fate of these children? It means like the windows and the classroom and this dull, dingy life that they're living in has, excuse me, has basically ruined them, has basically sealed them into their life, has basically, captured them in this life which they have no way of getting out of. The poet earnestly desires that each and every child should be able to enjoy the fundamental right to freedom. They should have access to all kind of books, new as well as old. They should also be able to learn from the nature around them and spend time in nature, and not just, and stuck in the city, in the slums. The poem ends on a positive note as he expresses the belief that people who are ignited by the spirit of knowledge and learning are the ones who create history. It is the moral liability of everyone to break barriers between the haves and the have nots and give a meaningful education to all. For history remembers only those people who are educated and have enlightened themselves for a better world.